The American Dream. Anyone, regardless of where they were born, what class they were born into, their race, their gender, or social status can fight for their own version of success, freedom, opportunity, and equality in America. A lot had changed in America during the 1920s. In the years prior, women had the role of housewife and stay-at-home mom. The Roaring Twenties was the age of social and political change. The number of working women was on the rise, and a lot of young women became more liberated and free. They did not fear change. With these new freedoms, many young Western women became what were known as flappers. They had short skirts, bobbed their hairs, listened to jazz, and flaunted their dislike for what was then considered acceptable behavior. A vocal leader of the 20s women's suffrage movement was Alice Paul. She was a feminist and one of the main leaders in the women's movement to have the 19th Amendment constitutionalized. I.W. Wells. She was an African American woman suffragist, a civil rights activist who stood up for African American women, and she led an anti-lynching crusade in the United States. Carrie Chapman Catt was the president of NAWSA and organized the International Women's Suffrage Alliance. Famous for her winning plan, which asked each state to give women whatever suffrage they could, and in the South pushed for rights to vote. They also formed the League of Women Voters to educate women in the governmental practices that is still influential today. Bessie Smith was one of the nation's greatest blues singers and empowered women. Each of these women achieved the American dream by making major political changes in America for women. In the 1930s, the American dream had been focused on working hard, men providing for their families, and the hope to rise above the Great Depression. By the 1940s, feminism started to play a role in the American dream. Instead of simply wanting a husband, a family, and a place to call home, they now had the opportunity to seek out employment, a new financial freedom. This would allow women without husbands to make their own money. During World War II, 350,000 women served in the U.S. Armed Forces, both at home and abroad. They filled traditionally male jobs and roles doing industrial and farm work. World War II brought millions of American women into the workforce, giving them an important position in society. With this new influence, they could fulfill their own ideas of the American dream instead of their husbands. The American dream for women during World War II was to have the opportunity to take part in the war and establish a lifestyle other than the housewife. Millions in America, like Eleanor Roosevelt, who advocated for women to be given factory jobs and equal pay. Colonel Ruby Bradley, a nurse stationed in Philippines during the Pearl Harbor attack, who helped sick and injured soldiers and smuggled out supplies to Americans. Lieutenant Annie Fox, the chief nurse at the hospital closest to Pearl Harbor, who was the first woman to receive the Purple Heart from the U.S. Army. And finally, Roswell Monroe, who built B-24 bombers for U.S. Army Air Force and resembled Rosie the Riveter, a cultural icon of the U.S., representing the American women who worked in factories and shipyards during World War II. All achieved this by fighting for America and holding jobs like no other woman before. The Civil Rights Movement was a non-violent protest throughout America for freedom, equality, and justice. It took a courageous person to lead the protest and to become involved because they knew they were risking their lives. People who stood up for themselves and others had determination, perseverance, a strong-willed mind. Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Cesar Chavez are the perfect examples of these traits because they knew what they were fighting for. In 1955, a bus driver told 4 black riders of the first row of the color section to stand and give the white person the seat. Only one disobeyed. And guess who that was? Rosa Parks. After police officers had arrived at the stopped bus, analyzed the situation, Parks was placed in custody. On December 5th, the day of Parks' trial, the blacks of Montgomery boycotted the buses. Black participation in the boycott became so well known that an African American civil rights leader, E.D. Nixon, took advantage of the momentum and formed the Montgomery Improvement Association to organize the boycott that lasted 381 days. Soon after the organization was formed, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was elected as Montgomery Improvement Association president. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a nonviolent activist. He founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to organize nonviolent protests. One of the most common nonviolent protest techniques that he used was the march. On August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led the most famous march in D.C. He delivered a speech with 250,000 people in the audience. On October 14, 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. became the youngest person ever to receive a Nobel Peace Prize for fighting racial inequality using nonviolent techniques. Cesar Chavez was a Mexican-American union leader and labor organizer. He founded the National Farm Workers Association in 1962. His union joined with agriculture workers organizing committee to strike against grape growers in California. As the two unions came together as one, they changed their names to United Farm Workers. During this time period, Cesar stressed his union to use nonviolent methods to protest for the rights of migrant farm workers in the Southwest. They followed his advice and used boycotts, marches, and hunger strikes. The boycott against grape growers was a success. The grape growers decided to sign a contract that would protect their workers and give them better pay that they deserve. These people are famous for the courage of standing up for what is right for themselves and for others. They knew it was their chance to fight against discrimination against their kinds. Because of what they did to stand up against others, the American dream came true. It was a good ending of the civil rights movement because people achieved their own version of success, freedom, more opportunity than ever, and finally, equality. Everyone in the United States has the same opportunity to realize the American dream. The people who fought for equality in the United States are the reason why we can fight for ourselves and we can use our voices.